I'm Galen Winsor, and I thought I'd share a few hands-on practical things that have to do with this nuclear scare scam. Now, you've heard that gamma energy, the kind of energy that comes off a rock like this, is the most penetrating, most damaging of all radiation. And not only that, here is uranium, the parent of radon, and they say if you can detect radon in a home, then it's bad. If you exceed the EPA's limit, it's reason to run you out of your home. Spend $13,000 like they did with Stanley Watrous' house in Pennsylvania the other day to get rid of the radon, to ventilate it out through. Ridiculous. Let's take them one at a time. This is a rock that I picked up in Natarita, Colorado. 16 weight % uranium. High-grade uranium. Hot. I read a thing the other day that says they had high-grade uranium, and lo and behold, it's too hot to transport, so they had to bury it on site. Oh, wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about radiation. If we can, yeah, are we picking up? If you put the probe right there, the meter goes off scale, and you can hear it, all right? Hot. Radiation, gamma radiation, is the most penetrating of all radiation. Oh, is it? All it's got between the rock and the probe is my hand. Doesn't count so pretty much, does it? What if I put the rock behind me? You don't suppose they've been lying to you, do you? I suspect they have. Well, let's do a little bit more. I got a black bottle. This stuff comes in white bottle. A bottle of no-dose. You can send children down to the drugstore to buy no-dose. All they need is money. In this are 60 white caffeine pellets. And this one is uranium oxide, U3O8. You can't buy it for love nor money. The state of Washington sent 2 of their Gestapo agents over to my home to confiscate my uranium samples on the 17th of December last year. Got a challenge. I'd like to have somebody in the room volunteer to take all of this bottle or all of this bottle. The only thing that I'll tell you is that one of them won't hurt you and the other one will kill you. Do you want the white stuff or the black stuff? White stuff? You do. There's enough in there to kill 4 men your size. The government says we got to ban this material. It's radioactive. Let's check it in the bottom of the bottle. Not very radioactive. Let's take the cap off. Oh, goodness. Very radioactive. This instrument will only count gamma, energy. It's just energy. Light's coming from those lights, only you're getting lots of infrared from the lights as well as ultraviolet. Energy response, and it's very carefully damped to only discriminated so it only gets the energy that comes from this. I don't want it to respond to a light, just to this. It cost me $1,000 to get an instrument that will just respond to this and not to that. This is radioactive by any definition. Radioactive material giving off radiation that is read by an instrument like this. The daughter of this, radon, cannot be read on this instrument because it gives off alpha particles. An alpha particle is a dye-positive particle that comes from the nucleus. It has 2 protons and 2 neutrons, therefore an atomic weight of 4, and it's minus 2 electrons. And if you grab it with a high ionization potential counter, it'll count. But if it travels 2 inches in air or through a piece of paper, it picks up 2 electrons, 2 beta particles, if you will, and becomes helium gas, and it won't count on an ionization chamber. Did you know that this thing right here is giving off helium gas? Alpha comes from uranium. Okay, radioactive material. You pour it out in the hand, and that's radioactive contamination. Is it radioactive? Yeah, it is. Very radioactive. Now, decontamination is nothing but scooping it back up and putting it into the bottle. I just now decontaminated my hand. No, I didn't do such a good job. Not good at all. Is it still radioactive? Yeah, that's called residual radioactivity. Now, under the decontamination rules of the government, when you decontaminate somebody like this that's that contaminated, and this is certainly a reportable incident under current DOE regulations, when you decontaminate him, it has to go down a controlled drain so that you don't disperse radioactivity. Do I qualify as a controlled drain? That material that I just ate is not soluble in body fluids. Like it's been this. It was fired originally at 940 degrees C, where it becomes U3O8, known in the industry as HCl insoluble. In other words, it will not dissolve in concentrated hydrochloric acid, hot. Your stomach has 10th normal hydrochloric acid in it, so it won't even dissolve. The stuff is so fine that it has no texture to it. Doesn't even feel rough. So it's tasteless, odorless, has no texture. How's it supposed to hurt me? Because I've been eating this on lecture tour for 2 years, the state of Washington felt it necessary to confiscate my uranium samples so that I would be safe. Dr. Fulton from the Hanford Environmental Health Foundation called up and he says, "Hey, I heard one of your guys OD'd on uranium today, Galen." And we talked for a little while and he says, "Oh, that was you." And I says, "Listen, I can eat all that stuff I want." He says, "It'll ruin your kidneys." "How are your kidneys?" "They're fine." "Well, you should have been chelated within 4 hours. And I mean, you guys are going to follow me around the country and give me chelating agents every 4 hours after I eat it on lecture tour?" He says, "We'll give you any medical assistance that you need, Galen. We don't want anything to happen to you." I said, "Did that include turning out the federal SWAT team 4 days ago to get me?" Where are these guys coming from? Well, here's a piece of metal. Density of 19.0. If you know your chemistry and physics, you know that there are only 2 metals that have that density: plutonium and uranium. Radioactive, pyrophoric, density of 19. Outside of a laboratory, most of you can't tell me whether this is uranium, plutonium, or a mixture of the two. Now, I said that it's heavy, and it is. Let's see if it's radioactive. Yeah, it is. Pyrophoric, what does that mean? Pyro, fire. Black on the end. The spark that just came off there is pyro, fire, burn. If it's plutonium, I just contaminated this area of Arizona in excess of the EPA's limit for 1 square mile of surface. Somebody laughed. It's serious. The end of progress altogether says that I just contaminated you in excess of the limit for 1 square mile. It's now silver on the end. Tomorrow it'll be black because it self-oxidizes, this black color like this, all by itself. Plutonium does that and uranium does that. Is it hazardous? Yeah, it is, because they take depleted uranium metal and make it into 50 caliber bullets, fire them from shoulder-held weapons. In 1976, they obsoleted tank warfare with these things because it only takes one dog face with one weapon to knock out a 65-ton tank. It'll go through 3 inches of armor plate, and when it comes out the other side, it's that white hot spark that we just made. And the 5 men in that tank are dead because it'll burn all of the oxygen out of the air and burn their flesh. 1976, they obsoleted tank warfare, and you never even knew that. They make 10,000 of those bullets every day in the United States. We got enough in arsenal to sink all of Russia's tanks, and our boys in the Defense Department don't even talk about it. Yeah, it's hazardous to your health. Reminds me, lead is hazardous to your health too, isn't it? Particularly if it's in a 45 slug like this and it hits you right here going about 2,600 feet per second. It's not the material, it's the impact from the velocity. Let's be very specific in the words that we use. This particular chunk of lead came out of a human body. My son, who's a deputy sheriff, thought maybe I could use it on tour. That's called dying of lead poisoning. Anything less is a figment of the imagination because it's not soluble in body fluid either. This is a pellet of cobalt-59. If you put it in a reactor into a neutron field, you can convert cobalt-59 to cobalt-60, which gives off a gamma. It becomes the source that doctors use to irradiate patients to 7,000 Roentgen for one patient. The total dose absorbed by radiation workers at 3 Mile Island in the last 6 years is something like 1,500 Roentgen. 5 times more given to a single individual in a doctor's facility. Now, do you know why I say that the federal regulations are absurd? And if you live by those federal regulations, maybe you're being absurd too? Now, a pellet of cobalt-60 this size got shipped by mistake to Mexico, got diluted into 5,000 tons of iron. Some of the reinforcing rod came up to Los Alamos, New Mexico, and they says, hey, that stuff's radioactive. Understand that this single pellet diluted roughly a factor of 1 billion was what they were reading on a detector like this at Los Alamos. And so they pulled back table legs that were in Spokane, Washington, made out of the same batch because it was hot and radioactive and it would burn you. When the pellet itself could be held in your hand like that for a few minutes without it burning you. Now, Christ walked the earth 1 billion minutes ago. If I could stretch this pellet out into a wire and it went clear around the earth and right back here to Phoenix, 1 billionth of this amount is 1.7 inches of that wire so stretched out. Stagger your mind? It ought to. Now, let's try a little game. The EPA says that 5 picocuries per liter of air is the limit for 222 radon. And they handle that like it's a real number. Madame Curie says that 1 gram of radium equals 1 curie equals 2.22 times 10 to the 12th disintegrations per minute, and that's the basic definition of radioactivity. How many disintegrations is this? Should we find out? And the EPA, in its wisdom, says that 11 disintegrations per minute from 1 liter of air, you have exceeded the limit. You know what I did the other day? I've been having a little tough with some legal authorities up in my house. So I took one of these bottles of uranium like this, and I dissolved it in an Erlenmeyer flask with nitric acid. And I got a crack in the basement floor, and I squirted that whole bottle into that crack on the basement floor in acid solution so that it'll drive that counter off third scale any place along a 10-foot section of that crack that I put. When they bring the radon measurement in there, you know what the radon's going to do? It's going to go off scale in their measurement. It won't go that high. If Watrous' house with 17 times this limit in it was caused to spend $13,000 and give it national TV coverage, press coverage, think what Galen Winsor's house is like. I went to the trouble to notify my congressman about it, Mike Lawrence, the manager of the Department of Energy in the Pacific Northwest, my state representative, Ray Isaacson, and a few other astute people, including the banker and the lawyers and the appeal court. What are they going to do with that? I set them up on that last Thursday, and I come down to Phoenix, so I escaped the falderall. What I'm saying to you is that the federal regulations are absurd. The congressman that put them into place ought to be fired. They ought to be sent home. The regulators, what do you do with them? Quit paying them. The taxpayer, the electorate, elects those people to go out and do a job. Why do you continue to pay them when they're teaching you baloney? When they're putting in regulations that don't make any sense? Cut it out. Quit paying them, fire them, send them home. The term I grew up with says can them. Is it easy? Apparently not. You haven't got the job done. The majority of the Congress is irresponsible, amoral, atheistic, irresponsible. Let's see, how many more adjectives can I drum up? But that many. Let me tell you. We as the people sent a bunch of rascals out to the energy store with a signed blank check. And we say, hey fellows, if you run out of money, just go build us a good power plant. If you run out of money, come back and we'll give you another signed blank check and guarantee the payment out of the ratepayer's pocket. Tennessee Valley Authority has the most nuclear reactors of any outfit in the place. Not one of them has produced any power since last August. Browns Ferry 1, 2, and 3 in Mississippi hasn't produced any power since last March. And they don't plan on producing any power at Browns Ferry until mid-year in '86. At $1 million a day in lost power revenue per plant and held off in the name of health and safety? Now tell me we didn't send rascals out to the energy marketplace with a signed blank check. They're still getting paid. Those reactors are all fully fueled, fully staffed, and just sitting there. Who's getting taken? The ratepayer. You're still paying more and more for your electricity all of the time. Now, Bonneville Power Administration says that 57% availability is okay for a nuclear reactor. Maine Yankee is often run at 103% availability, which means that it's running over nameplate rating. Enough days out of the year that its average availability is 100%. Bonneville Power Administration of the Department of Energy says that 57% availability is okay. That means that you can let those things set down 43% of the year, and that's judged as an acceptable performance on the part of the government. There's an obvious answer. Get the government out of the energy regulating business. Turn those plants over to people who will run them efficiently 100% of the time. When we put in zero-release containment, we started playing games. About the time that we proved that a nuclear reactor has no measurable impact upon the environment, that's when they bottled them up, put catalytic recombiners on them. Some of the reactors in Texas were designed not to breathe for 8 years at great expense. Why? When you bottle up a reactor like TMI-2 does, then you get radiolytic hydrogen, and indeed they had a radiolytic hydrogen burn at TMI-2. And they moan and they groan about that, and all they had to do was open up the windows and let the breezes blow through. You don't need containment on them. I'm going up to Colorado this weekend to meet with the Uranium Producers Association. And they're upset because the government is dumping uranium on the market and raising the price of the commodity that they get their bread and butter from. But what they're totally unaware of is that the Grand Junction Operation Office is going to issue a contract so that the new operator has a $25 million budget over the next 5 years, 80% of which will be spent for remedial action, where you take this material, dig it up. If you find it counts on a Geiger counter, you can have them come in and change out the whole front yard of your house, give you a new front yard, new foundation under your house at government expense. If you don't do it, they'll take you down to the courthouse, blacklist your property, so that you have to remove the radioactivity at your own expense before it can be sold. Now, do you know what I did when I took that uranium solution and poured it into the crack in my house? I set up the United States government, and that episode is about to be played. Did I do it on purpose? Yeah, I did, just like I used to dive into that swimming pool and drink that cesium-contaminated water. I found out that it doesn't hurt me. You need to find out that it doesn't hurt me, or you. In fact, the only reason for the existence of these big transcontinent distribution lines would be if they could compete with a small mass-produced reactor sitting in your backyard. Why don't they want you to? Because they are the federal energy cartel. They like to set the price, the total availability, and whether you can hook onto it, and if you don't pay your bill, cut you off. That's called power, domain, and control. And they like that. They do not want you to be energy independent. If you had one of these sitting in every 10-block area in Phoenix, you could tell the rest of the world to go get lost. Oh, there's another use for that heat. You could heat your homes in the wintertime, or you could cool them in the summertime with it. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, they call it, HVAC. In countries where it freezes, you could run that hot water out and chase the frost away in the spring and in the fall. And they found out that plants grow faster in warm water anyway, so you'd irrigate with it all summer. So cooling towers are called wasting towers. They throw over 50% of the heat away. The other morning, coming out of Tri-Cities, WNP2 was putting its 700 megawatt electric up through the clouds, 870 they were running at. And the clouds were laying all over the ground, and there was a little ice cream cone right out there, and I said, there's WNP2. It snows 5 inches every night out of WNP2, and the rest of us don't get any. Where'd the water come from? That's cooling the heat from the condenser cooler. You should have a business right out there, an oil cracking plant, something taking that heat and using it, like they built at Midland, Michigan 10 years ago and they've never used. And so Dow Chemical is suing the utility because they never produced the steam for their chemical plant right alongside it. We got troubles in this country. I'm telling you what the problem is. Doing something about it, responsibility is yours.